One day I'll buy you new shoes, Mama, Chimela vowed, gripping her mother's torn sandals with innocent determination. The late afternoon sun dipped low across Umueze village, casting golden rays through the wide branches of the old mango tree that stood proudly near Adanma's clay house. Its roots spread like the arms of a guardian, cradling the dusty earth beneath, where Chimela, a boy of just 8, sat with his legs stretched out, his gaze fixed on the sandals dangling from his mother's tired feet. The straps were broken, repaired again and again with raffia strings, until they looked more like patched ropes than footwear. Every step she took in them carried the weight of poverty, sacrifice, and unspoken pain. "Mama," Chimela's small voice came, clear yet filled with determination. He picked up the sandals she had slipped off to rest her feet. He ran his tiny fingers along the cracks. "One day, I'll buy you new shoes. Not like these, fine ones, real fine shoes." You will see Adanma looked at him, her eyes soft yet heavy with sorrow. Her son's innocence pierced her soul more than hunger ever could. She forced a smile, brushing her hand over his rough, dusty hair. "Chimela and Oim, eat your yam first. Shoes are not as important as food in your belly," but her son shook his head stubbornly. "No, Mama, your feet are always hurting. You walk far to the market carrying heavy loads. I will buy you shoes. I promise." His words, though spoken with the carefree certainty of a child, struck her heart with both pride and fear. Pride that her boy carried such compassion, fear that the world was too cruel for promises like his. Around them, life in the village carried its usual rhythm. Children chased after a football made of tied nylon bags, shouting, "Goal!" as they kicked the improvised ball through sticks planted as goalposts. Women sat in clusters, pounding yam, peeling cassava, and exchanging gossip that floated like restless birds in the hot air. From a nearby compound, the metallic hum of a generator filled the air. PHCN had taken light again, and only the wealthier homes could afford to fuel their noisy engines. Adanma's own house remained in darkness, where a small kerosene lantern waited for nightfall. The contrast of laughter around her and the emptiness within her hut clawed at her chest. She often went to bed hungry so that Chimela could have his fill. Yet he always noticed, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. He had a sharp mind, too sharp for a child his age, and a heart too tender for a world that thrived on survival. "Do you know what kind of shoes you'll buy me?" Adanma asked, hoping to lighten the moment. "Yes," Chimela's eyes lit up. "Black ones that shine like mirrors, and when you wear them to church, everyone will look at you and say, 'See Adanma. She is fine, fine woman.'" Adanma laughed softly, the sound carrying both joy and sadness. She pulled him close, pressing his head against her chest. He didn't know she prayed every night for that kind of miracle, yet she feared it would never come. Her life had been too full of disappointments. Too many promises made to her had been broken. Her gaze shifted briefly to the small wooden box tucked in the corner of the hut behind them. Inside, hidden beneath wrappers, lay a letter, a single folded sheet that had been her curse and her secret for years. A letter that tied Chimela not just to her, but to a past she wished she could bury. She prayed her son would never need to see it. As evening drew closer, the sky deepened into a mix of orange and gray. The sound of motorcycles rumbled from the main road. Adanma rose to gather firewood, but Chimela tugged her wrapper. "Mama, you're tired. Let me help." "You're still small," she said, kissing his forehead. "Your time will come." Yet as she turned to step away, her boy's words echoed in her heart. "One day I'll buy you new shoes, Mama." She felt tears sting her eyes. For years she had carried her pain alone, burying it beneath work and silence. But here was her son, unknowingly giving her the hope she had long abandoned. And then, the sound that silenced the village. The deep, commanding growl of an engine, unlike the rickety motorcycles or the battered Peugeot cars that passed daily. It was sleek, powerful, unfamiliar, Dust rose in clouds as a black SUV rolled to a stop directly in front of their compound, the kind of vehicle no villager dared to dream of owning. Children abandoned their play, mouths agape. Women stopped pounding yam mid-swing. Even the generator hums seemed to shrink into insignificance. The SUV door opened slowly, deliberately. A driver in dark glasses stepped out, his face unreadable. He scanned the compound as though confirming an address. His polished shoes gleamed, reflecting the last light of the sun. Then, with a voice that carried authority and finality, he called out one name: Adanma. Every head in the village turned. Adanma froze, the bundle of firewood slipping from her hands. The driver's voice thundered again, sharper this time. Adanma Nwok, Madam says you must come with us now. The village froze as billionaire Obiakor Nadozie stepped out, his polished shoes gleaming against red sand. The door of the black SUV opened slowly, almost theatrically, and out stepped Obiakor Nadozie, a man whose name carried the weight of fortune, power, and rumors that traveled faster than Harmattan winds. His suit was crisp, his wristwatch glimmered like captured sunlight, and his aura alone seemed to command silence. The dust of Umueze village, stubborn and clingy, dared not settle on his freshly polished shoes. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Children stood frozen mid-play, their nylon ball rolling aimlessly away. Women with pestles in hand paused, yam halfway pounded. Men at the palm wine joint leaned forward, squinting as though their eyes deceived them. Whispers slithered through the crowd like restless snakes. Obiakor Nadozie. Ah, the Lagos billionaire. Is it true he owns hotels in Abuja? They say he once dined with a governor. Some villagers, driven by fear or admiration, dropped to their knees to greet him. Others folded their arms and muttered with quiet disdain. Wealth like his was worshipped by many, envied by more, and trusted by none. Adanma's heart constricted in her chest. She hadn't heard that name spoken so close to her in 10 years, yet here he was, in her village, in her compound, standing so near she could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, a scar she had once traced with trembling fingers in a different life. She stiffened, her hands clutching her wrapper as though fabric alone could shield her from the storm of her past. Obiakor's gaze swept across the compound, taking in the cracked mud walls, the worn-out mats, the scattered firewood. His face betrayed no emotion, yet his eyes lingered when they fell upon Chimela. The boy stood with arms folded, unafraid, his eyes bright with curiosity. Unlike the villagers, he didn't tremble or bow. Instead, he stepped forward boldly, stopping only a few feet from the towering man. "Good evening, sir," Chimela greeted, his voice clear and confident. "Welcome to our side." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. No one ever addressed a man like Obiakor with such casual boldness. Some gasped, others murmured prayers. Obiakor's brows arched slightly, more from surprise than offense. He studied the boy intently, his sharp features softening for a brief moment before hardening again. There was something unsettling in the way the boy's eyes mirrored his own, the same fiery gaze, the same stubborn chin. His polished composure faltered as he felt the strange tug of familiarity. "Your name?" Obiakor asked, his deep voice cutting the silence. "Chimela," the boy replied proudly, lifting his chin. "Son of Adanma." The name struck like a bell in Obiakor's ears. He turned slowly, his eyes locking on Adanma for the first time in a decade. She lowered her gaze instantly, unable to withstand the weight of his stare. Memories she had buried deep threatened to surface. Nights of whispered promises in Lagos, mornings of betrayal, and the letter she had hidden for so long. The villagers, sensing the tension, leaned closer. Mama Ifeoma whispered to her neighbor, "See how she cannot even raise her eyes." There must be history there. Obiakor took a step closer to Chimela, scanning the boy's features. The curve of his nose, the firmness of his jaw, even the faint dimple that appeared when he smirked. All of it was too familiar, too close to his own reflection. His chest tightened as realization clawed at him. Adanma's pulse raced. Her whole body screamed to protect Chimela, but her legs felt like stones planted deep in the red earth. She had prayed this day would never come. Yet here it was, staring her down with the force of destiny. Obiakor's silence stretched, thickening the air until even the birds above seemed to hold their song. Then, with a voice that carried across the entire village square, he spoke words that shattered the quiet and sent shivers down every spine. Obiakor's deep voice thundered, "Who fathered this child? Because he carries my blood in his eyes." Adanma's silence screamed louder than words, for she carried a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. The crowd grew restless after Obiakor's thunderous question. Villagers shifted uneasily, their whispers swelling like waves in a storm. All eyes bore into Adanma, who stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the ground as though the red sand might open and swallow her whole. Her lips trembled, yet no sound escaped. It wasn't just fear that silenced her, it was the crushing weight of memories too painful to drag into daylight. Obiakor's stare remained fixed on her, unrelenting, sharp as a blade. "Answer me, Adanma," he demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Who fathered this child?" Adanma's throat burned, her chest heaved, but still no words came. Her silence was an answer in itself, and that frightened her more than anything. Adanma had once been a young woman of beauty and fragile hope, carrying dreams of a better life beyond her village. She had traveled to Lagos to work as a salesgirl in a small boutique, barely earning enough to survive, yet still believing that one day she would rise above poverty. That was when she met Obiakor. He wasn't yet the billionaire the world revered, but he was already wealthy, charming, and commanding. His words dripped with promises of marriage, of protection, of a future where she would never suffer again. For a while she believed him. For a while she lived in his shadow, cherished like a hidden jewel. But jewels can be discarded when new ones glitter brighter. Adanma's memories cut deep. The day she discovered she was pregnant, the way his eyes changed when she told him, the cold dismissal that followed. "I cannot ruin my life for this. You will sort yourself out," he had said, his voice as hard as steel. And then he was gone. No more phone calls, no more visits. She had been left to face the storm alone, her belly growing while her dignity shrank. The pain of rejection had burned her soul. She had begged him to remember his promises, but Lagos is a city where promises die quickly in the noise of ambition. By the time Chimela was born, she had become invisible to him, another casualty of his hunger for power. Raising Chimela alone had been a war she fought daily. The shame of being abandoned in the city forced her back to the village, where tongues wagged and neighbors whispered. Every time Chimela asked why he didn't have a father, she would smile faintly and say, "God is your father." But children see more than words. Chimela noticed the loneliness in her eyes, the long stares she cast into the distance when she thought no one was watching. He noticed how her face grew tight whenever the conversation shifted to Lagos, how her smile faded whenever men were mentioned. He didn't understand the details, but he sensed the shadows of a story unspoken. Now, with Obiakor standing in her compound, the villagers could no longer resist. Mama Ifeoma muttered loudly, "Ah, I knew it. The boy's face is just like Obiakor's. Didn't I say it years ago?" "Ehen, but she never admitted," another added. Some mocked her. "See her forming holy woman, but see what she did in Lagos." Others showed sympathy. It's not easy. Men can deceive. She has suffered the gossip spread like wildfire, each word adding fuel to Adanma's shame. She stood still, fighting tears, wishing she could silence every voice. Obiakor's eyes remained locked on Chimela. The boy's resemblance to him was undeniable, yet something gnawed at his mind. There was more here than a simple story of abandonment. He could feel it. Adanma was hiding something. His voice lowered, dangerous, measured. Adanma, tell the truth before lies bury you alive. Adanma flinched. For a moment her lips parted, but she quickly bit them shut. How could she explain? How could she reveal that in her season of loneliness, in her desperate attempt to survive, she had once accepted help from another man? Obiakor's own estranged brother? It had been brief, barely more than a fleeting connection. Obiakor's brother had shown her kindness at a time when she was drowning in despair. He had given her food when she had none, spoken words of comfort when her world collapsed. She had never loved him, not the way she had once loved Obiakor, but desperation can blur the lines between gratitude and surrender. And though she had tried to forget, the possibility lingered, haunting her at night. What if Chimela was not Obiakor's son at all? What if fate had played a crueler game than even she could bear? The murmurs grew louder until one voice rose above the rest, cutting through the tension like a knife. An old man, his voice cracked with age but clear with certainty, pointed a trembling finger at Adanma. Why are you hiding, Adanma? We all remember. Years ago, when you came back from Lagos swollen with shame, wasn't it Obiakor's brother who visited you often? Didn't he give you food and money? Are you saying we did not see with our eyes? Gasps erupted around the compound. Women covered their mouths. Men exchanged looks of shock. Even children felt the tremor in the air. Obiakor's face darkened, his jaw tightening as fury sparked in his eyes. The villager's voice rose again, louder, deadlier. If this boy is not Obiakor's son, then is he not the blood of his estranged brother? Against her better judgment, Adanma entered the billionaire's SUV, carrying her son into a storm she feared. The engine of the black SUV roared to life, shaking the ground beneath the bare feet of villagers who had gathered like moths around firelight. Adanma sat stiffly in the leather seat, her wrapper tightly folded around her, as though fabric alone could shield her from what was to come. Chimela, in contrast, pressed his face eagerly against the tinted glass, wide-eyed at the machine that seemed to glide effortlessly over the dusty road. The car pulled away, leaving a swirl of red dust that clung to the voices of the village. Envy poured out like smoke from every mouth. Ha! See how fortune comes to her overnight. She is blessed, truly blessed. Only God lifts a woman like this, blessed or cursed. Do you think the wife in Lagos will accept her? Better she refuses. Some fortunes end in tears. The whispers followed them long after the SUV disappeared from sight. Hours later, when the SUV descended into the beating heart of Lagos, Chimela's jaw dropped. His eyes darted from one side of the road to the other, overwhelmed by the kaleidoscope of chaos and beauty. "Mama, look! The houses are taller than palm trees," he shouted, pointing at skyscrapers glowing with neon lights. Okadas zigzagged recklessly between honking cars. Billboards towered overhead, flashing the faces of celebrities selling everything from soda to perfume. Street hawkers weaved between vehicles, balancing trays of gala, plantain chips, and cold bottled water on their heads. "Eya!" Chimela exclaimed, his palms pressed against the glass. "So people live like this?" "Mama, look at that light. You know they blink like our own bulb." Adanma forced a weak smile, though her stomach twisted. Lagos had once held promises for her, but now it only reminded her of betrayal. Every skyscraper seemed to mock her with memories she wanted to bury. By the time they turned into Obiakor's estate, night had settled fully, but the mansion stood illuminated like a palace carved out of dreams. A fountain gushed in the front yard, its water dancing under lights that shimmered like diamonds. The gate itself rose like a fortress, guarded by men in suits who saluted as the SUV rolled in. Chimela gasped audibly. Mama! Seawater that is jumping without river. Is it juju? Adanma shushed him quickly, her nerves rattling. Keep quiet, my son. Behave yourself inside. Marble floors stretched endlessly, polished so well they reflected every chandelier above. Gold-framed portraits lined the walls. The air smelled faintly of imported perfume and polished wood. To Chimela, it felt like entering a dream. To Adanma, it felt like stepping into a trap. Housemaids lined up in stiff rows to greet Obiakor. Some bowed respectfully, others exchanged furtive glances. Whispers followed Adanma as she stepped across the marble. Is that not the woman who once worked here as a maid? True, I remember her face, eh? She left in shame years ago. So she has returned? With a child? Chineke! Adanma kept her head down, praying Chimela wouldn't hear. But Chimela, fearless as always, marched forward as though the house belonged to him. He touched the fountain water, trailed his fingers along the marble railings, and even peeked into rooms he wasn't invited into. The boy wandered with innocent boldness, his voice echoing through wide halls. Mama, come and see. This chair is softer than our bed. Mama, look. This light no day blink. It's like sun inside house. The maids giggled, torn between amusement and pity. Adanma's face burned with shame. But Obiakor watched the boy with an intensity that unsettled him. Every move Chimela made reminded him of his own youth, curious, daring, unafraid. For the first time in years, Obiakor felt something he couldn't define. Was it pride, guilt, or fear that this boy carried truths even he wasn't ready to face? That evening, they gathered at the long mahogany dining table, a spread of delicacies laid out before them. Steaming jollof, fried plantain, grilled chicken, soup seasoned with the care of professional chefs. Chimela's eyes widened at the sight, but he ate slowly, observing the cutlery as though it were a puzzle. Adanma, however, could barely swallow. Each bite tasted like sand in her mouth. The silence at the table was heavy, broken only by the clinking of silver spoons. Obiakor's gaze rarely left Chimela, studying every gesture, every smile. Adanma kept her eyes on her plate, her chest rising and falling too quickly. She knew this silence. It was the same silence he used years ago, just before breaking her heart. Obiakor leaned back in his chair, his wineglass untouched. The boy laughed suddenly at some private thought, and the sound struck Obiakor like a spear. His lips moved in a whisper, too low for anyone else to hear, yet the words seemed to carry their own echo. At dinner, Obiakor whispered to himself, "If he is not mine, then whose blood runs in his veins?" The chandeliers sparkled, but shadows of hatred already danced on the walls. The mansion seemed to breathe differently that night. Though every chandelier cast its golden glow across marble floors, the warmth of light could not hide the cold stares and whispers swirling through the air. For Adanma, seated on the edge of a velvet sofa, the house no longer felt like a palace, it felt like a lion's den. From the spiral staircase descended Ngozi, Obiakor's wife. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble, each step echoing like a warning. She was a woman carved in elegance, her wrapper shimmering with gold embroidery, her hair tied high in a style only wealth could sustain. Her eyes, however, betrayed her soul, narrowed, hard, and burning with fire. She stopped midway, her gaze falling on Adanma, as though she were filth that had stained her floor. Her voice, calm yet dripping with venom, broke the silence. "So, this is the woman who dares to sit under my roof." Adanma stood quickly, lowering her head. "Good evening, madam," she murmured, her hands gripping her wrapper tightly. Ngozi's lips curled into a smirk that carried more malice than a slap. "Evening? You bring your village dust into my home and call it evening? Obiakor must have lost his senses to bring you here." Chimela, seated by his mother's side, frowned. "Don't talk to my mama like that," he blurted, his young voice trembling with defiance. Gasps escaped from the servants who lingered at the edges of the hall. No child had ever spoken to Madame Ngozi in such a tone. Her eyes flared at the boy's audacity. But before she could speak, footsteps thundered from the staircase. Ebube, her son, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in designer wear that screamed entitlement, appeared, his face twisted with disdain. "So this is him?" Ebube sneered, his eyes scanning Chimela like one would examine an insect. "This village rat?" Chimela stood, small but unshaken. "And you? Who are you to call me that?" The servants muffled their gasps again. The boy's boldness was both shocking and dangerous. Ebube's jaw tightened. "I am the rightful heir of this house. My father's name, my father's blood, my father's empire. You are nothing but a mistake that should never have walked into this mansion." The words stabbed Adanma's heart, but Chimela's small fists clenched. "If you are truly strong, you won't need to insult small children," he shot back, his chin lifted. The hall thickened with tension, the silent air vibrating with the clash of two worlds. One boy born with wealth, another born with nothing but courage. By the next day, the household staff had already carved the scandal into stories of their own. In the kitchen, maids whispered while chopping vegetables. "Did you see how the boy answered Master Ebube? He is too bold," another maid shook her head. "He is bold because he has the blood. Look at him well. He looks exactly like Oga when he was young." But not all whispers were supportive. In the laundry room, two other staff snickered. "That Adanma has returned to scatter the mansion. Madame Ngozi will not allow it. Just wait and see." Loyalties began to split like cracks in marble. Some servants admired Chimela's spirit and sympathized with Adanma, while others tightened their allegiance to Ngozi, knowing her wrath could cost them their jobs. At the core of the storm was something deeper than insults: inheritance. In hushed tones late at night, Ngozi confronted Obiakor. Her voice trembled with anger, though she tried to lace it with reason. "Obi, listen to me," she said, standing before their wide bed draped in silk sheets. "If you bring that boy into this house as your son, what happens to Ebube?" "To me? Do you think the board of directors, the investors, the family will not question your loyalty?" Obiakor sighed, his face hard but weary. "Ngozi, don't start. I will not deny what my eyes have seen. That boy, he carries my blood." "Blood?" Ngozi spat. "Blood is nothing without position. Have you thought about tomorrow when people whisper that your heir is not from your wife, but from some village woman you abandoned? Do you know the shame?" Obiakor turned away, his silence cutting deeper than words. One night, unable to sleep, Adanma wandered toward the long corridor. The hum of voices drifted from the master bedroom door left slightly ajar. She froze when she heard her name. Ngozi's voice was sharp, slicing through the quiet. "That woman will not stay here, and if that boy remains, Ebube and I lose everything. Do you want to ruin us, Obiakor?" Adanma's heart clenched. Her knees weakened as tears welled in her eyes. Every word confirmed what she had feared from the start. She and Chimela were not guests in this house. They were intruders in a war they never asked for. The days that followed only worsened. Ebube made no effort to hide his disdain. At the dining table, he rolled his eyes whenever Chimela spoke. In the yard, he mocked his clothes. When Chimela picked up a book from the library, Ebube snatched it away. "Books are not for people like you," he taunted. But Chimela never cried. He never bowed. His stubborn bravery unsettled Ebube even more, for it was the kind of spirit that could win hearts, and that, more than anything, made Ebube feel threatened. One late evening, as mother and son sat in her room lit by a golden lamp, Ngozi's face hardened with resolve. She leaned close to Ebube, her voice low and dangerous. "Listen to me, my son," she whispered. "That boy is not here by mistake. He is here to take what belongs to you. If he stays, we both lose everything." Her words lingered in the air like poison, a promise of a storm that had only just begun. Barefoot yet unbroken, Chimela's spirit stood taller than the marble halls around him. From the moment Chimela entered the mansion, his presence unsettled the delicate balance of power. The household children, born into polished shoes and expensive perfumes, could not resist the urge to ridicule the boy whose cracked heels had once carried him barefoot across dusty village roads. "Village rat," one of them muttered as Chimela walked past, his shorts a little too loose, his shirt faded but clean. "How did a boy like you find his way into a house like this?" Laughter followed, sharp and mocking. Eboob, their leader, smirked proudly as though each insult was a crown placed on his head, but Chimela did not shrink. He turned, his eyes glinting with mischief and courage. "Rat? If I am a rat, then I must be a clever one. Rats always find food in the kitchen, even when lions go hungry." The room fell silent for a beat. The servants nearby stifled their laughter, their eyes darting nervously toward Ngozi's wing of the mansion. Even some of the children chuckled reluctantly, impressed by his sharp tongue. Eboob's face darkened. He clenched his jaw, anger twisting inside him. This boy, this intruder, had dared to stand tall where others bowed. Word spread quickly among the staff. In the laundry room, one maid whispered with awe, "That small boy, he faced Master Eboob without shaking." Another nodded. "He carries fire in his chest. If Oga is wise, he will not ignore him." But others shook their heads, fear clouding their faces. "That boldness will cost him. Madame Ngozi will not allow such a boy to rise in this house." From his study, Obiakor had been watching. Not openly, not directly, but through carefully chosen moments, listening from behind slightly open doors, watching from his upstairs balcony as the boy moved in the courtyard. Something about Chimela's spirit gnawed at him. He saw himself in the boy's confidence, in the way he refused to cower. Yet doubts lingered like shadows in his mind. Was this truly his son, or the cursed blood of his estranged brother? One evening, when the mansion gathered in the grand hall for relaxation, Obiakor set his quiet test. "Children," he said, his deep voice commanding attention, "I have a riddle for you. Let us see who among you has wisdom beyond their years." He leaned back, his gold wristwatch catching the chandelier's glow. "A man has 3 sons. He must divide 17 cows among them so that the first son gets half, the second gets 1/3, and the third gets 1/9. How will he do it?" Ebube smirked, raising his hand quickly. "It is impossible," he declared confidently. 17 cannot divide that way. The man should sell the cows and share money instead." Some of the other children laughed in agreement. "Yes, impossible," they chorused. Obiakor nodded slowly, but kept his eyes on Chimela, who sat quietly on the edge of the hall, his bare feet tucked under the chair. The boy's eyes glowed with concentration. After a moment, Chimela stood, his voice steady. "It is not impossible, sir. The man should borrow 1 cow, making it 18. Half of 18 is 9. 1/3 is 6. 1/9 is 2. 9 plus 6 plus 2 is 17. He can then return the borrowed cow." The hall fell into stunned silence. Even the ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed to pause. Obiakor's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. He stared at Chimela as though he had just seen a ghost. Ebube's fists tightened under the table. His chest burned with rage as he watched the servants whisper among themselves, admiration glowing in their eyes. Some even dared to clap softly for Chimela's answer. "This house is mine," Ebube muttered to himself, his teeth clenched. "Not his. Never his." That night, in the privacy of his room, he raged to his mother. "Can you not see? That boy is stealing everything. Even father's eyes follow him now. If he stays, I will be nothing." Ngozi cupped her face with her manicured hands. her voice a snake's whisper. Patience, my son. We will not let a village rat take your inheritance. Trust me. Meanwhile, in the guest quarters, Adanma sat on the edge of her bed, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. Chimela lay beside her, already drifting into sleep, his breaths soft and even. Her heart, however, was restless. Each day in this house felt like walking on sharpened glass. She could feel the hostility of Ngozi, the jealousy of Ibubi, the whispers of the staff. And her son, bold, fearless, stubborn, refused to hide his spirit. She stroked his hair gently, whispering, Chimela, my child, your courage will either save you or destroy you. In his private study, Obiakor poured himself a glass of wine he did not drink. He replayed Chimela's riddle answer in his mind, the boy's sharpness, the stubborn spark in his eyes. He had seen it once before, in his own reflection, but doubt was a poison he could not ignore. The whispers of his brother's name still haunted him, festering like a wound. Closing the file on his desk, Obiakor reached for his phone. His voice, low but firm, carried finality. Arrange for a DNA test, he ordered. I need the truth. Once and for all, the call ended with Obiakor's whisper to himself. If he is not my son, then whose blood is this that dares to burn in my house? Obiakor tore open the envelope, each word inside dripping with destiny. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Obiakor's private study, throwing lines of gold across his mahogany desk. His hand trembled slightly as he slid a letter opener under the sealed envelope. For a man whose empires spanned oil blocks, hotels, and banks, it was strange how a single sheet of paper could weigh heavier than all his fortunes. He pulled out the folded document, his eyes scanning line after line until the final words froze him. Probability of paternity, 99.9%, Obiakor. Ndozi is the biological father of Chimela Nwoke. For a long moment, silence swallowed him. The ceiling fan hummed, the clock ticked, but his world stood still. His breath grew shallow. He leaned back in his chair, staring at nothing, his mind flooded with memories he had buried deep, the young Adanma in Lagos, the promises he had whispered, the betrayal that followed. A whisper escaped his lips. My son. Obiakor closed his eyes, guilt clawing at him. He had abandoned her, abandoned them both. While he chased wealth and status, Adanma had carried the weight of his blood alone, feeding their son with sweat and tears while he sipped champagne at banquets. The shame was unbearable. For once, his billions meant nothing. He felt small, exposed, and unworthy of the boy who carried his blood so fiercely. The news spread quickly through the mansion. When Ngozi stormed into the study, the door slammed against the wall with a thunderous crack. Her face glistened with rage, her wrapper disheveled from hurried movement. Obiakor. Tell me it is a lie, she screamed, her voice breaking the calm of the house. Tell me that paper is forged. That boy is not yours. Obiakor didn't answer. He only slid the paper across the desk toward her. Ngozi snatched it up, her eyes darting across the lines. Her mouth twisted into a snarl. No, this cannot be. You will not destroy me with this shame. You bring a village woman, a common market seller, into my house to humiliate me. Her voice rose louder, echoing through the halls. Servants stopped in their tracks, straining their ears to catch the scandal unraveling. You make me a laughingstock, Ngozi continued, her voice cracking. After everything I gave you, after every humiliation I endured, you crown another woman's son in my presence? Her chest heaved as she hurled the paper to the ground, her hands shaking. Adanma is a homewrecker, and that bastard child of hers will never stand as heir while I breathe. Abub had been listening from the doorway, his face pale, his fists clenched. The words hit him harder than any blow. He stepped forward, his voice breaking. So, "It is true," he whispered. His eyes darted between his father and mother. "All this while, Chimela is my brother?" The revelation twisted inside him like a blade. His enemy, his rival, the boy who stole the servant's admiration and his father's attention, was bound to him by blood. His eyes narrowed. If Chimela was truly his half-brother, then every inheritance, every future plan, every legacy he had been groomed to carry was now threatened. Obiakor tried to speak. "Ebub, don't touch me," Ebub snapped, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "You raised me to believe I was your pride. Now you throw me aside for him? For a boy from the village?" He stormed out before anyone could stop him, his footsteps echoing like thunder up the staircase. The mansion was no longer a home but a battlefield. Servants whispered in corners, alliances forming overnight. Some sided with Ngozi, fearful of her power and wrath. Others leaned toward Adanma, moved by her humility and the boy's spirit. In the kitchen, one maid whispered, "Blood cannot be denied. That boy is Oga's son." Another retorted, "But Madame Ngozi will not allow it. Mark my words, blood or no blood, she will fight to the end." The air grew tense, every corridor filled with suspicion. Even meals at the dining table became quiet wars fought with stares and unspoken words. Through it all, Chimela remained blissfully unaware of the full storm raging around him. He played in the courtyard, chasing after a ball made of rags he had brought from the village. He marveled at the library's rows of books, pulling out volumes too heavy for his small arms. One afternoon, he sat beside a maid, laughing as she taught him how to peel oranges with a knife. "Mama says I will be great one day," he told her with a proud smile. "And I will buy her shoes that—" Shine the maid, moved to tears, whispered, "Nam, you are already great." But innocence could not shield him forever. Destiny had already inked his name into a war he did not choose. Days later, Obiakor gathered the family and key staff in the grand dining hall. The tension was thick, the chandeliers above burning brighter than usual, as though they too were witnesses to history. Ngozi sat rigid, her lips pressed tightly, her anger barely contained. Ebub stood beside her, his eyes dark with resentment. Adanma sat quietly at the far end, her hands clasped together, her gaze fixed on the floor. Chimela, unaware of the storm, swung his legs under the chair, humming softly. Obiakor rose to his full height, his voice steady, authoritative, unyielding. "I have received the results of the DNA test. It confirms what my eyes already knew." He paused, his gaze sweeping across every face. "Chimela is my son." My blood gasps echoed across the hall. Ngozi's nails dug into the table. Ebube's chest rose and fell with rage. Adanma shut her eyes briefly, tears welling. Obiakor's voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of a verdict. "From today," Obiakor declared, his voice like thunder, "Chimela lives here as my son and heir." That night, Adanma's pillow carried the weight of tears she dared not show her son. The mansion had grown quiet, but inside the guest quarters, Adanma lay awake. Chimela slept peacefully beside her, his small chest rising and falling, his face relaxed in innocent dreams. But for Adanma, the night was heavy. She pressed her face into her pillow, stifling the sobs that threatened to wake him. Her son had been recognized, not just by the village, not just by whispers, but officially, by the man whose blood flowed through him. It was something many women would call a miracle. Yet Adanma's heart refused to celebrate. Pride and fear wrestled inside her like two wild animals locked in battle. Pride, because Chimela's worth had been proven beyond doubt. Fear, because recognition meant she might lose him forever. Word had already traveled back to Umuez. The village market buzzed with her story. Women at the palm oil stall shook their heads, their voices dripping with envy and speculation. "Ha! Adanma has truly seen favor, from cracked sandals to sitting in mansion chairs. Another laughed. Favor, my sister, be careful. Wealth is sweet until it swallows you whole. That boy will forget her soon. Rich blood does not remember poor mothers. Others were kinder. Still, she has fought battles we cannot imagine. If God lifts her, who are we to curse? But Adanma, seated in the pew of her village church days later, knew their words were daggers dressed in cloth. They judged her, envied her, pitied her, all at once. The church was dim, lit by flickering candles. The choir rehearsed softly in the background, their voices rising like incense. The pastor's sermon that Sunday was on destiny. Children of God, he boomed, his voice echoing against the walls. When God writes your name into greatness, no man can erase it. But know this, destiny always comes with trials. Before glory, there must be fire. Adanma clutched her wrapper tightly, her head bowed, her lips moving in silent prayers. Oh, Lord, is this the fire before the glory? Or is it the fire that burns me and takes my son? Tears streamed silently down her face as she lifted her hands, surrendering her fears to heaven. That evening, back at the mansion, Chimela climbed into her lap, his arms wrapping around her neck. Mama, why are you always crying when you think I am not looking? Her breath caught. She tried to smile, brushing his hair back. It's nothing, Wham. Just tiredness, but Chimela shook his head stubbornly. Don't worry, Mama. I will not leave you. Even if they give me golden shoes, I will walk back to you. You are my Mama forever. Her heart broke and healed in the same moment. She hugged him tightly, her tears soaking into his shirt. Chimela, my son, my promise from God. But in the master wing of the mansion, Obiakor sat with his lawyer. His voice was steady, businesslike, as though discussing a merger. That boy is my son, he said firmly. He will not be raised in poverty. He belongs here, in this house, in this family. Draft the papers. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, nodding. Sir, you understand this will cause conflict. Public conflict. Are you ready for that? Obiakor's jaw tightened. Let the world talk. My son will not live as a beggar's child while I breathe. That night, Adanma fell to her knees by the bed, her hands lifted high. Her voice was broken, her words spilling like rain. God of widows, God of single mothers, fight for me. Do not let the rich take the only joy I have. Do not let them swallow my child. I have nothing but him, Lord. Nothing. Her sobs filled the room until Chimela stirred in his sleep, murmuring her name. She quickly wiped her tears and crawled beside him, her body curling protectively around his small frame. 2 mornings later, the peace of her fragile hope was shattered. A knock thundered at the guest quarters. When Adanma opened the door, a man in a black suit stood there, holding a brown envelope. Mrs. Adanma Nwoke? He asked curtly. Yes? Her voice trembled. He handed her the envelope. By order of the court. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Her hands shook as she tore it open. The words blurred through her tears, but the meaning stabbed her clearly. Obiakor Ndozie, claimant, hereby files a petition for full custody of the minor, Chimela Nwoke. The room spun around her. Her knees buckled, the paper falling from her hands. She clutched her chest, gasping as though the very air had betrayed her. The summons lay at her feet, heavy as a death sentence. Obiakor was suing for full custody of Chimela. In court, Adanma's voice shook, but her spirit refused to bow to wealth. The courthouse was a fortress of concrete and authority, its steps swarming with reporters whose cameras flashed like lightning. The story of a billionaire fighting a poor village woman for custody of a boy had spread like wildfire. Men sold newspapers on street corners. Obiakor's hidden son discovered. Headlines screamed betrayal, inheritance wars, and scandal. Inside, the gallery overflowed. Villagers from Umuez had traveled in buses just to witness the trial, whispering prayers for Adanma. Businessmen in crisp suits sat alongside petty traders, and everywhere the air buzzed with curiosity. For many, it wasn't just a case, it was a war between power and poverty, dignity and money. Adanma sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly, her wrapper simple but neatly tied. Her eyes darted nervously around the courtroom, yet in their depths burned quiet fire. She was not educated, not polished, but she carried truth, and truth, she believed, must stand even when dressed in rags. Across from her, Obiakor sat tall, his expensive suit sharp, his face unreadable. His lawyers, 3 of them, each armed with thick files and sharpened tongues, whispered strategy, their confidence unshaken. Beside them, Ngozi adjusted her diamond earrings, her lips curved into a smile too bitter to hide. The judge entered, his gavel striking once. Court is in session. Obiakor's lead counsel rose first, his voice smooth as silk. My lord, we are here to secure the future of young Chimela Nwok. His biological father, Chief Obiakor Nadozi, a man of wealth and honor, seeks full custody to provide for him a life beyond poverty, hunger, and ignorance. We ask the court to act in the child's best interest. The words landed heavily. Heads nodded in the gallery. How could anyone argue against wealth as a guarantee of a child's future? But when it was Adanma's turn, she stood slowly, her hands trembling, her voice untrained, yet her spirit refused to bow. My lord, she began, her Igbo accent thick but clear, I am not rich. I am not learned in books like these men, but I'm the mother of Chimela. I carried him in my womb for 9 months. I have fed him with my sweat, clothed him with my hands, and watched him grow with my prayers. I may not have billions, but I have love. And love, my lord, is greater than wealth. Her voice cracked, but the silence that followed was more powerful than any lawyer's rhetoric. Some in the gallery wiped their eyes, but Obiakor's lawyers were relentless. They painted Adanma as unfit, parading photographs of her small clay house, her cracked pots, her patched wrappers. Can this woman provide stability? One lawyer thundered. Should a boy of such potential grow up in such squalor when his father can give him mansions, tutors, and every opportunity money can buy? Ngozi leaned forward, smirking as the court murmured in agreement, but she wasn't done. In secret, she had already bribed 2 villagers to testify. The first villager stood, clearing his throat. My lord, I know this woman. She is unstable. She used to talk to herself at night. Sometimes she would even cry in the market. How can such a woman raise a boy? Gasps filled the courtroom. Adanma's heart dropped. She recognized him, a man who had once begged her for food. Now he had sold his tongue for Ngozi's bribe. But she refused to break. Rising again, she faced the judge. My lord, is it madness to cry when hungry? Is it madness to weep when you have no money to feed your child? If tears are madness, then every poor woman in Nigeria is mad. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his eyes softening. Then came the moment no one expected. The judge, weary of adult battles, called the boy to speak. Chimela Nwok, he said gently, come forward. The small boy rose, his step steady, his eyes bright with courage. He stood on the witness platform, looking out at the sea of faces. My lord, he began softly, I know my papa is rich. I see the big house, the big cars, the lights that never go off. But I know my mama too. She is the one who carried me on her back when I was small. She is the one who gave me food even when she did not eat. If I must choose, I choose her, because she is my mama, and I promised her I will buy her shoes one day. A silence fell, so deep it was almost holy. Journalists lowered their cameras, their hands trembling. Some villagers broke into quiet sobs. Even a few servants from Obiakor's house bowed their heads. Public opinion shifted instantly. Outside, Reporters would later describe it as the boy's testimony that shook a nation. But just as the tide seemed to turn, tragedy struck. Chimela's small frame trembled, his eyes fluttered, his lips moving weakly. "Mama," he whispered. Then, before anyone could move, his knees buckled and he collapsed on the courtroom floor. Gasps and screams filled the air. Adanma rushed forward, gathering him in her arms, her wails piercing the hall. The judge's gavel pounded desperately. "Order! Order!" But there was no order. The courtroom had descended into chaos as the boy who refused to bow now lay unconscious, his promise hanging in the balance. Chimela's body lay limp in his mother's arms, his fate uncertain as the courtroom dissolved into panic. Hospital machines echoed like drums of fate as doctors revealed devastating news. The courtroom chaos had spilled into the hospital. Journalists camped outside the emergency ward, their flashes lighting the night like restless fireflies. Inside, the air was heavy with disinfectant, prayers, and fear. The rhythmic beeping of the ECG monitor pierced the silence, each sound a reminder that Chimela's fragile body was fighting against something unseen. Adanma sat on the metal chair beside his bed, her wrapper soaked with tears, her hands clutching his small fingers. His face was pale, his lips cracked, his breath uneven. "Stay with me, Niam," she whispered over and over, rocking slightly as though motion alone could keep him tethered to life. Obiakur stood at the foot of the bed, his normally commanding posture reduced to stillness. For the first time in his life, his wealth and connections were powerless. He could buy hotels, silence newspapers, and bribe politicians, but he could not command his son's body to heal. The thought alone stripped him of his usual arrogance. 2 doctors entered, their white coats fluttering like grave messengers. One cleared his throat before speaking. "Chief Obiakur, Madam Adanma, your son has a rare genetic blood disorder. It weakens his red blood cells and leaves him vulnerable to sudden collapses." Adanma's hands flew to her mouth. "Jesu, doctor, what are you saying? My son, is he dying?" The doctor's face softened. "Not if we act quickly. He needs an urgent bone marrow transplant, and the donor must be from immediate family, someone with matching blood markers." The words fell like stones. Adanma clutched her chest, gasping as though air itself had turned against her. Obiakur's voice trembled for the first time in years. "Doctor, I will pay anything, whatever it takes. Name your price. Fly in specialists from abroad. Charter a private jet. Do whatever you must, but save him." The doctor shook his head gently. "Sir, money cannot buy compatibility. This is not about wealth, it is about blood." The room fell into silence, the truth echoing louder than any threat of death. Obiakur lowered himself into a chair, his face buried in his palms. For the first time in his empire-filled life, he felt utterly powerless. Beside the bed, Adanma wept silently, her tears wetting the sheets. "God, don't take him. Not like this. Don't let the devil win. I have only him, only him." Her mind spiraled back to the nights she had gone hungry so Chimela could eat, to the days she had carried him on her back while pounding cassava, to the laughter they shared under the mango tree. She had survived hunger, shame, and loneliness, but the thought of losing him was... At the doorway, Aboob stood still, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. He hated the boy, hated the way he stole attention, hated the way his presence shook the foundations of the family. Yet, as he watched Chimela lying helpless, his hatred twisted into something else. Jealousy mixed with pity, anger with fear. The boy was his blood. Half of him hated that truth, half of him could not deny it. He whispered under his breath, unseen, "Don't die, boy. Not like this, not before I figure out how to fight you." Then he turned away quickly, ashamed of the weakness in his chest. As the night deepened, the hospital corridor emptied. Adanma sat alone with Chimela when the door creaked softly. An older maid from the mansion slipped in quietly. Her face shadowed, her steps hesitant. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on Chimela with a tenderness Adanma had never seen in a servant. She reached out, brushing his hair gently, her lips trembling with unspoken words. Adanma frowned. "Why are you here?" "At this hour?" The maid's eyes filled with tears. She knelt beside Adanma, her hands shaking as they reached for hers. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the machine's beeping. Finally, the maid whispered, her voice cracking like glass. "Adanma, forgive me for hiding this so long. I am your sister." Adanma's world shattered when the maid she trusted revealed blood ties she thought were lost forever. For a moment, sound abandoned the ward. The monitors still traced green lines across a small screen. The drip still counted slow, clear tears into a vein. The fluorescent light still sighed, but for Adanma everything went silent and far away, as if she had slipped underwater. The older maid's fingers, work-worn, faintly bleached at the knuckles from years of cheap detergents, held hers like an anchor. Up close, the woman's face was a map of endurance. Tiny scars across the brow, a soft indentation at the cheekbone, a riverbed of lines that told of laughter rationed and grief unspent. Her eyes, though, were unmistakable, hazel warmed by brown, the same shade that stared back at Adanma in the mirror on the rare morning she dared to look closely. A childhood memory rose without permission. Two little girls racing along a dusty path, one shouting, "Wait for me, Ada! Wait!" and the other turning to giggle, "Hurry then, Unkem!" The names flew back to her like birds returning to a long-forgotten roof. "And Kemdali," she breathed, the syllables trembling out of her like a prayer. "And Kem, is it you?" The maid nodded, the tears finally breaking. "It is me, Ada M., your own." She folded Adanma into a hug that smelled of bar soap and hospital corridors, and for a moment the years collapsed, the bus station where they were separated, the long seasons of silence, the rumors that one had been taken to the city and disappeared. They clung to each other at the foot of a bed where a small boy slept, a thin blanket rising and falling with the measured patience of machines, and between their chests something old and broken began, carefully to set itself again. When they broke apart, Adanma wiped her face with the end of her wrapper and looked at the woman properly, as if a second inspection might shatter an illusion. "How?" she asked in a rasp, eyes darting from the door to the bed. "Why did you never? Where did you go after that day?" Mama cried until her voice collapsed. Some questions were too wide to carry at once, and Kemdali glanced at Chimela, brushed his hair from his forehead the way an ant would, and spoke quietly, her words a thread unspooling. Years ago, when the city was still a rumor on their tongues, and money was a stubborn ghost that refused to appear, she had left the village with a woman who promised shop work in Surulere. Instead, the woman delivered her to a cramped house where work meant endless chores paid in insults and scraps. She learned the rhythm of servitude quickly. Wake before light, sleep after midnight, speak only when spoken to. After 2 years of that small death, an opportunity stumbled her way. A catering job at a wedding where she, quick-handed and soft-spoken, caught the eye of a house manager who needed reliable help for a wealthy household in Ikoyi. "I did not know then whose house it was," Nkem said, a bitter smile grazing her mouth, "only that it was large, and they said the pay would be regular. They took me through the back gate and handed me a uniform. When I saw the surname on the gate, I thought it was a coincidence. Lagos is big, names repeat. But the first time I saw him, Ada, Chief Obiakor Ndozi, I felt the ground shift, and when I later heard a new maid whisper your name like a rumor that would get her slapped, I knew where I was." Adanma's breath stuttered. The room tilted. "You knew that I had been here?" "I knew you had passed through," Nkem said, shame and tenderness wrestling in her voice. "I came after, when the house had already learned to swallow your name like a bone. They never spoke it in the open, but servants talk. I realized you and I had been circling the same fire from different sides. She leaned closer, voice dropping. Listen to me, Ada. You think you know the man, but houses like these carve second faces for their owners. There are ledgers that do not live in the office and phones that never ring in the open. At night, when they think the help is deaf, they speak freely. I have carried briefcases I was told never to open, watched men in native caps shake hands that felt like burial soil. And Madam is not a branch grafted after the tree grew. She is root and soil with him. She does not merely enjoy the shade, she waters the darkness. The monitor ticked on, indifferent to revelations. Outside, a trolley squeaked down the corridor, the wheels protesting with a rhythmic squeal. Somewhere, a nurse laughed too loudly, the way people do to keep sorrow from climbing into their throats. Adanma gripped the bedrail to steady herself. She had come to the mansion with fear. Now fear acquired faces and names. "What secrets?" she whispered. "Speak plain." "The kind that build empires without foundations," Nkem replied, glancing at the door again. "Inflated contracts. Land whose deeds were signed by hands that had been dead 3 months. A warehouse nobody enters except at night. Cash in nylon bags. A boy once, young, eager, an accountant. He asked a question he should not have. The next week he stopped asking. He stopped everything. They said he resigned. I saw his mother in the gate months later, calling his name through the bars." Silence pooled, thickly between them. Adanma could taste iron at the back of her throat. She thought of Ngozi's cool smile, of the way power often wore a woman's perfume while a man pretended to own it. She thought of Obiakor's eyes when he looked at Chimela. Full of storms, yes, but also of something softer, regret-shaped. She did not know how to reconcile the man who had abandoned her with the father who stood stunned at his son's bedside. Somewhere between those two figures ran a fault line of secrets, deep enough to swallow a village whole. "Why did you not tell me?" she managed, anger and relief tangling like kudzu. "Why hide from me when you knew we breathed the same air again?" Nkem's chin trembled. "You think hiding was pride? It was survival. When Madam suspects you belong to someone else's past, she lights incense to hunt your spirit. She keeps a list in her head of every mouth that must remain closed. I kept mine shut so I could watch, so that if the day came when your name returned with breath, I would still be standing to shield it." She exhaled shakily. "And I kept one ear for the house, one ear for the streets. The day you arrived, the gate staff texted me 2 words. Olive returned, because that is what I called you in my prayers. A branch plucked yet still green, Adanma could not hold back any longer. She pressed her brow to Nkem's shoulder and wept, quiet and furious and grateful. Her tears were not tidy. They were mudslides. In their salt lived the funeral of a decade and the small resurrection of a name. When the storm eased, Chimela stirred, lashes fluttering like moth wings. His eyes opened softly and found the new face hovering above him. "Mama," he croaked then, puzzled. "Who is this woman that looks at me like rain?" "Your auntie," Adanma said, swallowing a sob and forcing a smile into shape. "My sister. Your blood." He turned his head, studied Nkem like a puzzle, and then reached his hand to hers with the calm solemnity of a small chief. "Auntie, I am Chimela. I promised Mom I will buy her new shoes. When I am strong again, we will go together to the market. You will help me choose, so she does not say it is too fine for Village Road." Nkem's laugh came out broken and bright. She kissed his knuckles, her tears dotting his skin like new anointing. "I will help you choose, onwa même, and I will make sure those shoes carry her across fire without burning." In the doorway, a shadow paused. Obiakor had come without announcing himself, his large frame unexpectedly hesitant. He took in the scene at once, the boy awake, the two women holding a web of hands in history, the intimacy of family rebuilt right under the white light of hospital truth. For a long second, he did not enter. He only watched, something old and unspeakable moving across his face. When he did step in, his voice was a careful instrument. "How is he?" "Fighting," Nkem replied, straightening instinctively, the uniform reasserting its discipline, even as her eyes stayed tender. She did not release Chimela's hand. She would never again release that hand. Obiakor nodded, came to the foot of the bed, and looked at the boy with a softness he had not earned but could not help. "You will be strong again," he said, half command, half plea. "Your father—" He stopped himself, glanced at Adanma, found no permission there, and swallowed the rest. The machine answered in beeps. He turned to go, then turned back. "What you said that day in court," he told Adanma, voice grit-edged, "about love being greater than wealth. I've been rich for a long time. I'm learning now what that sentence costs." He left before anyone could reply, his perfume lingering in the doorway like a conflicted ghost. Later, when a nurse brought a tray of lukewarm custard and left them to their small island, Adanma leaned close to her sister. "He is going to fight me in court until I have no breath," she said. "But I looked in his face just now and saw a man hauling a weight only he can feel. Nkem, if there are things in that house that can keep my son safe, I need to know them. If there are things that can break me, I need to know them faster." Nkem nodded, eyes flinting. "There are documents I have dusted that should never see sunrise, contacts I have memorized by the ring of their ringtones. If we pull at the right thread, Ada, the wrapper will unravel. But threads cut fingers, and Madame sews with knives. Already she's been moving like Harmattan, drying everything soft. The witnesses in court, her hand, the story planted in the blogs about you, her hand." There was a driver she trusted to do her dirtiest errands. 2 nights ago I saw his number flash on her iPad. She smiled the way a woman smiles when she has chosen an arrow. "Chosen an arrow," Adanma echoed, a chill passing through her body despite the heat. "An arrow needs a target," Nkem said, "and when money is afraid of losing its throne, it begins to name children as targets." They both looked at the bed in the same heartbeat. The room, suddenly, felt too small to contain their fear. As evening draped itself across the city and the hospital windows turned into mirrors, a message found its way into Obiakor's phone. A grainy photo of Ngozi in a quiet corner of the hospital car park, her head bent near a man with a cap pulled low. A second message followed from an anonymous number. "Control your house, Chief, before the wind you ignored becomes a flood." It might have been a prank. It might have been something else. He felt a shiver he did not acknowledge and told himself he was imagining patterns where none existed. But suspicion once woken is a restless child. It tugged his sleeve all night. When he confronted Ngozi later at the mansion, she laughed too loudly and kissed his cheek too sharply. "So now we police each other like thieves," she said, tinkling her glass. "You drag shaman and then demand trust? Please, Obi." He said nothing, but his eyes, the same eyes that lived in the boy's face, began to search for edges he once ignored. Back at the hospital, the sisters dozed in shifts, heads jerking up at the smallest change in the monitor's song. Nkem startled awake near midnight, remembering a thing, a detail from an overheard whisper on the back staircase 2 days earlier. Dates, a time, a driver's route, the gate nearest the fountain. She was about to tell Adanma when her phone vibrated with a message from a junior maid who feared nothing but being ignored. "Madam just left house with a boob. She said they will pass by hospital first, then small errand. Driver, that one you warned me about." And Nkem's eyes widened. She stood, the chair scraping the linoleum like a shout. At the same time, beyond the ward's door, the corridor filled with the soft thunder of approaching steps, expensive heels and impatient leather soles. A cold clarity slid into her bones. She leaned into Adanma's ear, voice a razor-thin whisper. Brace yourself. This night is sharpened. The door opened. Ngozi entered with a smile lacquered onto her face, Ibub, a grim eclipse at her shoulder, a third presence lingering in the shadowed hallway like a half-written threat. She cooed false concern, asked thin questions, touched the bedrail with manicured compassion. Then, when the nurse stepped out and the hallway's watcher drifted 2 paces farther, she leaned toward her son, her lips barely moving, her eyes gleaming like glass over oil. Ngozi's whisper slid out, venom wrapped in silk. Then let the boy die in an accident. Screams pierced the air as a speeding car targeted Chimela at the mansion gate. They had brought him home for rest, the doctor had said, supervised, gentle, no stress, a brief window of familiar walls and quieter air before the next round of tests. By late afternoon, the mansion glowed with low sun, the fountain casting shards of light across the driveway, the gate humming with the soft electronics of its sliding rails. Street vendors murmured beyond the high fence, pure water, while an okada buzzed past like an angry fly. Inside the compound, Nkem walked with one arm around Adanma, the other hovering near the boy, ready to catch him if his knees faltered. Chimela wore a sweater 2 sizes too big, and a smile that fit just right. He wanted the sun. Only small, he said, and the doctor had agreed. Stand here, Nkem told him, aiming her phone to take a picture under the bougainvillea. When you are strong, we'll take another. We will compare and laugh. The gate began to open to admit a delivery van the kitchen had been expecting. The rails groaned, the panels parted, and with the metal barely halfway, a dark sedan outside jerked forward. It hesitated like a predator gauging distance, then shot through the gap. Chim! Nkem's voice split. The sedan screamed toward he. The boy, engine roaring, tires spitting gravel. For a second, everyone was a single raw nerve, a guard dropping a clipboard, the driver at the wheel, a blank silhouette, sunlight burning off the windscreen. Chimela turned, eyes wide, legs stunned. Adanma lunged, her wrapper tearing at the knee. The world narrowed to the blunt, stupid fact of a car rushing a child. 2 guards slammed into motion. One dove for the boy's waist, tackling him so hard the breath flew out of him. The other swung a baton into the sedan's front corner. The car swerved, clipped the crate of bottled water by the gate, shattered plastic and liquid fanning like rain. The sedan fishtailed, corrected, then punched the accelerator and shot back through the gap. It vanished into late-day traffic, leaving behind scrape marks, a bent gate panel, and a scream still hanging in the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, sound returned like a flood. Adanma's wail, high and animal. Nkem calling Nwam, Nwam, the radio at the security hut barking frantic instructions, 2 housemaids sobbing in disbelief. Chimela curled on the paving stones, winded but alive, his palms scraped, his sweater streaked with dust. Adanma gathered him, rocking, clutching, crying into his hair. God, God, not my child, not my child. She tasted metal and dust, sweat stung her eyes, and Nkem crouched beside them, hands moving with trembling efficiency. Check the pupils, check the breath, check the ribs. He's okay, she kept saying, to the boy, to the mother, to herself. He's okay, he's okay. The head of security, a barrel-chested man with a scar that cut his eyebrow into 2 hesitant halves, sprinted to the gate. Lock it down, he barked. Radio the junction. Get plate numbers, anything. Where was the second camera? The guard at the console swallowed. The feed for the street-facing lens was a gray square. It cut out 2 minutes ago, Olga. We were calling the vendor 2 minutes. The chief's voice went low. 2 minutes before a car decides to fly? He spat onto the gravel. Chai. Within minutes, the driveway swarmed with uniforms and whispers. A neighbor's driver swore he saw a man in a cap loitering at the opposite verge before the car shot through. "He just stay there, they look," he said, palms up. "No phone, nothing. He be like person way they count they found a smear of brake fluid at the inner curb where the sedan had clipped and corrected. They found scorch on the gate motor casing, as if someone had overworked its circuit. They found nothing that could be named as proof in a court, only a stack of circumstances arranged like a snare. Upstairs, from the balcony, Obiakor stared down at the chaos. For a long time he did not move. The scene below split him open along old seams. Fear for his son, fury at invasion, a slow, cold doubt licking at the edges of his marriage. When the radio crackled that the street camera had cut out "by" itself, he felt a prickle he knew too well from business, when things went wrong in the most convenient way. He descended. By the time he reached the driveway, the boy had found breath enough to sit up. "I'm fine," Chimela wheezed, a brave lie. He tried to smile at his mother and failed. Ebube appeared at the back of the crowd, the set of his shoulders all wrong. He took in the skid arcs, the bent gait, the dust on the boy's sweater, his mother's face. His stomach turned. "Who called that delivery?" Obiakor asked, voice flat. The kitchen supervisor stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Sir, the water supplier, the same we use." "And who approved the gate opening while my son is under it?" His gaze sliced toward the guard hut. The chief lifted his chin. "I did, sir." The driver would have had to stop at the inner barrier. This was not normal. "Nothing is normal in this house anymore," Kam muttered, too low for anyone but Adanma to hear. They replayed what footage the system would give them. The driveway camera showed the moment the sedan broke through the opening. A blur of paint, a flash of chrome, a driver's cap, a smear of sun. The timestamp stuttered. 5 seconds dropped like coins down a drain. The street feed was a dull, useless gray. The guard on duty swore the cutout had been a fault. The chief swore that faults rarely choose perfect timing by accident. Inside the foyer, the atmosphere thickened like harmattan dust. Staff gathered in clumps, whispering, "Na set up, who get mind? Jesus cover us." Ngozi appeared on the landing in a silk robe, each step measured, concern lacquered on like polish. "What happened?" she asked, mouth making an O of horror when they told her. "A car? Inside our gate?" She pressed a hand to her chest. Anyone who did not know her would have believed the gesture. But Aboob knew the angle of his mother's fear. He had memorized its exact weight from childhood. This one was lighter, more performative, an actress testing lines. A shard of memory stabbed him. The hospital corridor 2 nights before, his mother bent toward a man in a cap, a laugh with no warmth. He had told himself it was nothing. He had told himself many things since the day the DNA paper arrived. Now his throat tasted of rust. He followed her into the private sitting room and closed the door. "What did you do?" he asked, voice low. Her brows lifted. "Excuse me?" "At the hospital," he said. "The man in the cap. The driver and Kem warned about, the way you talked to him." He swallowed. The words felt like betrayal in his mouth, and yet the sight of the boy on the stones would not leave his eyes. "Tell me you had nothing to do with this." Ngozi's laugh was small and sharp. "So you are now a policeman because a boy you barely know tripped near a car?" "He didn't trip." His voice cracked. "It aimed at him." She turned, the silk whispering. "You are trembling like a leaf. Get hold of yourself. Your father is out there making a show of command. Don't add weakness to the spectacle. It's not weakness to have a conscience." The sentence startled them both. He had not known he had it until it fell out of him. He heard his father in his own tone and flinched. Her eyes chilled. Conscience is a luxury people with nothing to lose like to advertise. Focus. She moved closer, her hand on his jaw, gentle the way a knife handle is gentle before the blade. Everything we have stands on a balance. That boy is a thumb pressing down on the other side. If he stays, if he becomes heir, we, both of us, will be pushed into history like dust. I don't want to be dust, Aboob whispered, but I don't want blood on me either. Blood? She scoffed. There's no blood on stones that never touch the body. Through the door came the muffled drone of voices. Nkem coordinating with guards, the chief calling the estate office, a maid praying in urgent whispers. Somewhere, a siren wound up and faded. Somewhere, a child, someone's gardener's son, laughed at something small and innocent in a corner not yet colonized by fear. Obiakor stood outside the sitting room a long while before knocking. He had gone first to the boy, had insisted on a doctor checking him on the spot, had ordered a replacement camera by nightfall. Now he needed a different answer, the kind no technician could fix. He knocked once, then opened without waiting. Ngozi turned, light catching her ring. Your security is failing, she said before he could speak. What are you running here, a palace or a motor park? He ignored the bait. Someone cut the street feed 2 minutes before a car turned my gate into a runway, he said. Someone knew exactly when the water truck would come. Someone paid a driver who disappeared into thin air. I will find who, then find them, she snapped. You're the one who invites wolves to dinner and then complains about teeth. He stepped closer, his voice gone quiet and lethal, the voice he used in meetings where men signed their souls away. I am asking you a question I never thought I would have to ask. Did you have anything to do with this? Ebube stared at the floor. Silence loomed like a cliff. Ngozi's pupils flared. You dare? I dare, he said. Because today a car tried to erase my son. Because 2 nights ago someone sent me a photo of you having a cozy chat with a man we fired for cause. Because the way you are acting now is artful, not afraid. I am not a fool, Ngozi. Don't mistake my patience for blindness. Something hot and wild rushed into her face. For years she had been the spine behind his swagger, the one who smoothed the dirty paperwork, who made calls at unholy hours, who arranged silence when silence was a commodity. She had taken his name and built herself a fortress inside it. Now he stood in her fortress and asked if she had brought a match. Pride rose like smoke. Fury made her careless. What if I did, she hissed. What if I refused to be replaced by a village womb? What if I refused to watch my son become a guest in a house I bled to build? Ngozi, Aboob's voice broke. Mama, stop. Her breath came fast. The years of calculation, the weeks of humiliation, the hours of staging that had just failed, all boiled over. She threw her hands out, silk snarling around her wrists, and the mask she wore for the staff dropped to the floor like a shattered plate. Weak but determined, Chimela clutched a small envelope, his savings for a promise he would never break. The days after the failed accident felt like the hush that follows thunder. Guards doubled their shifts. Cameras sprouted like mushrooms along the perimeter walls. Conversations dropped to whispers whenever Chimela entered a room. Adanma lived on the edge of her own breath, every creak of the gate or flicker of a shadow pulling her heart into her throat. Yet, through the storm, Chimela carried a quiet, stubborn purpose. Even in his weakened state, he asked again and again about the envelope he had hidden in his small box back in the village. A patchwork of saved coins, crumpled notes, and little gifts from sympathetic neighbors. Mama, he whispered one night when her hand rested over his chest as if shielding his heartbeat. I must finish my promise. I will buy your shoes. Adanma tried to hush him, kissing his forehead, telling him he needed rest, that shoes could wait until he was strong. But Chimela shook his head with the kind of certainty that only children and prophets carry. Mama, I will not wait. If I wait, maybe God will not let me. I must do it now against the doctor's instructions, against her own fear, Adanma agreed. Enkem and 2 guards accompanied them, forming a protective circle as they slipped into a quieter corner of Balogan Market, where the chaos of Lagos still beat like a drum, but could be navigated carefully. The air was thick with voices, hawkers shouting, customers bargaining, radios crackling high-life music. Stalls overflowed with fabric that shimmered in the sun, shoes stacked like miniature towers, the smell of roasted corn and fried akara drifting between the aisles. Chimela's small hand clutched his envelope so tightly his knuckles whitened. His steps were slow, deliberate, but his eyes shone with determination. "I know what I'm looking for," he told his mother. They passed stall after stall, shoes in every color and shine. Some vendors, recognizing the boy from newspaper pictures, whispered, "Another billionaire peekin'," and tried to offer the most expensive pairs. But Chimela shook his head. "No, not too shiny. Mama will not wear shoes that will shout louder than her spirit." Finally, at a modest stall manned by an elderly cobbler, Chimela stopped, his eyes fixed on a pair of black leather shoes. Simple, strong, elegant, he touched them with reverence. "These ones. They are strong, Mama. They will not break when you walk to church." The cobbler looked down at the boy, at his pale cheeks and trembling fingers. Something in his old heart softened. "For you, small master, I will take only half the price." But Chimela insisted, shaking his head firmly. "No, I will pay the full. I promised Mama I would buy them myself." With shaky hands, he counted every note, every coin, placing them in the man's calloused palm. When the cobbler handed him the shoes, neatly wrapped in brown paper, Chimela's eyes glistened. He held them as though they were made of gold. Back at the mansion, Chimela called his mother into the courtyard. The guards and servants, curious, lingered at the edges. He unwrapped the paper slowly, his hands trembling, not from weakness, but from reverence. "Mama," he said softly, lifting the shoes toward her, "see, I told you. One day I would buy you new shoes." Adanma's knees buckled. She dropped to the ground, clutching the shoes to her chest, sobbing into the leather. Her tears stained them, baptizing them with gratitude. "Chimela, my son, my joy, my heart, God bless your days, whether many or few. God bless your hands that gave me dignity." The courtyard fell silent, even the birds pausing in their chatter. Servants wiped their eyes, and Kem turned her face away, her own tears slipping freely. Obiakor, who had watched quietly from a distance, felt something collapse inside him. For all his billions, for all his towers and fleets, he had never given such a gift. Not one born of sacrifice, not one heavy with love. True fatherhood was not measured in wealth, he realized, but in the willingness to break one's own back to lift another. That evening, Obiakor found himself sitting quietly outside, the shoes resting beside Adanma's bed while she prayed over them. He remembered his own father, hard, proud, always measuring success in land and cattle. Perhaps that was why he had thought wealth alone could substitute for love. But Chimela, a boy from dust and hunger, had reminded him of a truth he had long buried, that a heart could give more than a bank ever could. Ebube, too, felt the tremor. He had watched the scene with conflicted eyes, jealousy burning but softening into something else. For the first time, he wondered who he was without inheritance. Who was Ebube, apart from his father's shadow? The boy who had once mocked Chimela as a village rat now felt a strange tug of respect and an uncomfortable question about his own hollow sense of self. For a brief moment, the mansion seemed quieter. Conversations were softer, meals less tense. Even Gozi, though still sharp-eyed, kept her words close, perhaps shaken by the failed accident and her son's shifting loyalties. Adanma placed the shoes carefully under her bed each night, as though they were holy relics. When she wore them to church the following Sunday, She walked with her head higher, her steps lighter, as though leather alone had lifted years of shame from her shoulders. But peace in that house was a guest that never stayed long. Just as dusk painted the sky purple one evening, a loud knock thundered at the mansion gate. Not the polite buzz of the intercom, not the scheduled rumble of deliveries, but a heavy, insistent pounding that made the guards freeze. Boom, boom, boom. Everyone in the courtyard turned. Chimela clutched his mother's hand, and Kem's heart skipped. Obiakor's face hardened. The gate shuddered under the weight of the knock. An uninvited guest had come, carrying fate in his shadow. At the gate stood Obiakor's estranged brother, vengeance burning in his eyes. The pounding on the mansion's gate rattled like war drums. Guards rushed, rifles slung across shoulders, barking orders. The iron doors groaned open to reveal a tall, broad man in a weathered agbada, dust clinging to the hem as though he had wrestled his way through deserts. His eyes, sharp, cold, unblinking, locked on the mansion with a hunger that was neither curiosity nor admiration. It was vengeance, simmering, waiting for fire. "Open the way," he commanded, his voice deep and raw. "Tell Obiakor that the bloody abandoned has come knocking." The guards hesitated. One stammered, "Sir, who should we say is asking?" The man straightened, his frame filling the gate like a shadow of destiny. "Tell him Chukwudi Nadozi has returned." The name struck like thunder. Some of the older staff gasped audibly. Stories of the estranged brother, vanished for years after a bitter family feud, had become legend. Now he was here, flesh and fury at the gates of wealth. When Obiakor appeared at the balcony, his face tightened. He had not seen Chukwudi in 15 years, not since that last violent quarrel over land, inheritance, and betrayal. That day had ended with fists, blood, and a vow. They would never stand under the same roof again. "Let him in," Obiakor said finally, his voice low, his jaw stiff. Chukwudi entered slowly, his sandals crunching gravel, his eyes sweeping the marble fountain, the polished stone, the armed guards, the servants lined up like shadows. He sneered. "So this is what you built with your lies, Obiakor. Palaces on bones, fountains on graves inside." The family gathered in the grand hall. Adanma clutched Chimela's hand protectively. Nkem stood beside them, her eyes wary. Ngozi, ever the actress, leaned against the banister, her lips pursed but her gaze sharp. Ebub shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty to his father and suspicion born of recent revelations. Chukwudi's voice filled the hall, each word heavy with accusation. "You think you can erase me, Obiakor? You think you can silence the truth? Tell them. Tell your wife, your children, your servants, how you stole what was mine, how you bribed elders to rewrite our father's will, how you drove me from the land that was my birthright." The hall erupted in whispers. Ngozi's eyes darted to her husband. "Obi, is this true?" But Chukwudi was not finished. His voice grew harsher, his fury sharper. "Tell them how you built your empire, how those hotels in Abuja stand on land bought with blood money. Tell them about the contractors who disappeared after they asked too many questions. Tell them, Obiakor. Let your son hear what kind of man he calls Father. Obiakor's silence was damning. His fists clenched at his sides, his eyes burning with both shame and defiance. For years, Adanma had carried her pain quietly, believing herself powerless before the giant of Obiakor's world. But hearing Chukwudi tear open the past lit something inside her. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Enough of hiding. For too long, men like you have turned women into shadows. But today, I will not cower." She turned to Obiakor, her eyes blazing. "You abandoned me. You abandoned our son, and now the world sees it. If you must be great, let it not be with lies. If you must lead, let it not be with blood. My son deserves truth, not palaces built on shame. Her words shook the hall. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably, as though her truth had pierced the armor of wealth. Then, unexpectedly, Chimela rose from his seat. His body was weak, his steps unsteady, but his eyes glowed with determination. He placed himself between the two brothers, his small frame standing in the gap of decades of hatred. "Stop fighting," he said, his voice soft but cutting through the noise. "If you are brothers, then why do you hate each other like enemies?" "Papa, uncle, what is money if it makes blood fight blood? Mama says love is greater than wealth. If love cannot live in this house, then what is the use of all this?" Silence fell. The boy's words, innocent, unpolished, uncalculated, cut deeper than any accusation. Tears pricked Adanma's eyes. Nkem placed a trembling hand on her sister's shoulder. Even Abub lowered his gaze, ashamed of the pride that had ruled him. For the first time in years, Obiakor's mask cracked. He sank slowly into a chair, his powerful frame suddenly small. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I built all this," he said, gesturing around, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside me. But it did not. I thought money could bury mistakes, but mistakes have voices, and they return to knock on gates. I was wrong. His eyes turned to Adanma, then to Chimela. "I failed you both. I failed as a man, as a father, as a brother, and now everything I tried to hide is laid bare." Chukwudi stared at him, fury still burning, but softened by the sight of a man finally broken. The mansion was never the same after that night. The household lived with the echoes of truths too loud to ignore, but something new began to take root, something fragile, something uncertain, yet undeniably alive. Abub, shaken by Chimela's words, began seeking a new path for himself, away from the shadow of inheritance. Ngozi, though bitter, realized her schemes were crumbling, her power slipping like sand through her fingers. Chukwudi remained wary, but for the first time sat under the same roof with his brother, if only to test whether reconciliation was possible. And Obiakor, once a giant of pride, walked softer, spoke slower, as though learning to be human again. One Sunday morning, the sun rose bright over Umueze village. Church bells rang, villagers filled the dusty road, children sang hymns off-key. And there, walking hand in hand, came Adanma and Chimela. On her feet shone the black shoes her son had bought, simple, strong, elegant. Every step she took echoed with dignity restored. Beside her, Chimela smiled faintly, his small frame still fragile, but his spirit towering. The villagers whispered, some in awe, some in envy, but she no longer cared. The shoes spoke louder than their voices, and Kem walked a step behind, her eyes proud. Ebube, in plain clothes, joined the congregation quietly, choosing humility over titles. Even Obiakor arrived, not as a chief, but as a man seeking forgiveness. As the choir swelled and voices lifted, Adanma bowed her head in prayer. She remembered her son's words under the mango tree. "One day, I'll buy you new shoes, Mama." And though fate had struck with cruelty, betrayal, and storms, love had replied louder, stronger, truer, indestructible. Adanma walked into church in her new shoes, Chimela's hand in hers. Fate's reply was cruel, but love spoke louder. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think fate was fair to Adanma and Chimela, or was love the only true victory? Remember to like this video if you felt the emotions deeply. Share it so others can experience the journey, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Your support is what keeps these stories alive.